Welcome to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, I've got a guest with me, Keith Rodgers, who has his views about the neurodiversity movement. We're going to hear from him so we can hear other sides different from my view. So please hang around and hear his points. Thank you. Keith, would you like to share with us how you got involved in your views of the neurodiversity movement and what you think it is?
Yes, so neurodiversity movement basically claims that the mental condition that you speak of is a harmless difference, and there would be no problems if the discrimination against these individuals ended. And I believe that's one of the stupidest and craziest ideas ever to gain traction. It is a debilitating mental illness which blights the lives of those who have it and those around them, especially family members stuck taking care of them. And so I became aware of this neurodiversity movement through my former friend in college. I'm not friends with him anymore. I knew him in college. I even went to Montreal with him. He had paranoid delusions and rages and accused a member of the club that we were in of actually practicing witchcraft, among a number of things. I reconnected with him several years later with great caution, and he claimed to have this condition, which he never claimed to in college, and also be very strongly for neurodiversity, wearing this condition, which I'm convinced he doesn't have, as a badge of honor, and having a Twitter page promoting neurodiversity. And actually made a mistake. Again, I was hesitant of going with a cruise on him, and he attacked me for being eugenicist, Nazi, and so on, for saying that there were any problems with this condition. And I will also say that, unknown to very few people, I have made medical history by being one of the first people with this condition to be treated with magnetic resonance therapy. Oh.
Okay. Well, first of all, to begin with, it sounds more like what you're talking about is the neurodiversity paradigm, but the neurodiversity movement is a separate movement. The neurodiversity movement.
Yes, I agree. I agree that the neurodiversity movement may be doing some good things, but the core premise is that this condition is simply a natural variation. So as this former friend, I won't name him, claimed, so they believe that attempting to cure this condition is equivalent to attempting to cure homosexuality. And he made extremely bad arguments for why it is harmless. So I said, for instance, what about the problem with them being unable to make friends? He said, well, we force people to be friends with them. So first of all, that violates the principle of freedom of association. And how is it possibly going to be enforced? When the government can't enforce tax laws, they can't enforce mask requirements or anything like that. And also, that would not be real friendship. And how are you going to be friends with them when they have rages and have psychotic rages or have paranoid delusions and so on?
What it sounds like is it sounds like you're thinking the neurodiversity movement is all about autism, but that's what's called the autistic self-advocacy movement. The neurodiversity movement is
well,
everyone. So it
Well,
includes schizophrenia even. So schizophrenia is in the neurodiversity movement, depression disorder, epilepsy, that's part of the neurodiversity movement.
Okay. Well, one thing is, I saw you attack Jonathan Mitchell when he said, I don't believe in the concept of neurodiversity. And you pointed out that neurodiversity exists. Obviously, it does exist in humans and any other organisms with neurological systems. But what he meant was he doesn't believe in the premise of saying this condition is completely harmless. All right, so would you say that schizophrenia is completely harmless and doesn't cure and doesn't cause any problems? So would you eliminate drugs to treat schizophrenia?
No, the neurodiversity movement doesn't intend to do that. The neurodiversity movement's not against things like medications, cures, and so on. It's about redefining, coming up with what actually is a disease from a social norm.
Well, yeah, I do agree with you that what's considered a social norm to some extent is arbitrary, but this condition that you're talking about clearly causes harms besides social norms. It causes people to have constant sensory overload. The vast majority will never live independently. There was a longitudinal study of these children, and of 185 diagnosed in childhood, only 2 had managed to live independently as adults. That's approximately 1%. The vast majority of them never will. And they say that it's just a variation like homosexuality. But when you have a homosexual child, you don't have to worry about supporting it and caring for it until you die and worry about what will happen to it after you die. Homosexuality does not prevent people from living functional lives.
People seem to misunderstand this analogy. It was by Judy Sinner. And on the political side, she was pointing out that disabled people were being treated just like when homosexuals were being ostracized, when they were being discriminated against.
Well, in many countries, they still are.
It's not, she wasn't saying that autism doesn't prevent people from becoming independent. And this is actually part of the movement. Is the reason we're against applied behavior analysis is because the testimonies of autistic people go saying it does not help us in the long run. So we're saying,
well, I agree.
He's asking for better treatments.
Yes, well, neurodiversity movement, and I've read many of their articles, so don't say these advocates are not saying it, is that treating it is a horrible thing, equivalent to genocide, because it's completely harmless and part of their identity. Yes, many articles, they say, compare attempting to cure it to attempting to cure homosexuality, and not because of the harm it caused, but the premise that curing it would be a good thing is evil.
Yeah, trying to cure autism, but is the view from the neurodiversity movement is that we shouldn't need to cure autism. And then,
well, I know that's the view. That's what I have a problem with. And if there were effective treatment to even slightly reduce the symptoms, that would do these people 1,000 times as much good as anything the neurodiversity movement has achieved.
Actually, there already is these things that do alleviate that. And where you said things like sensory overload, that's not part of autism. That's just something.
Oh, well, why is it not part of? Yes, and I know what the neurodiversity people claim is that things that are extremely bad are not part of that condition, but simply comorbid with it, and they arbitrarily define it so that those things are not part of it. So if sensory overload and all the other things associated with it are not part of it, that brings the question: what is this condition?
That's
it's a condition with no symptoms.
no, it's what brings me to my own theory, because something by someone called Dr. Damien Milton, he actually proposed the same theory as me, and he called it the double empathy problem. And it goes showing that autistic kids can socialize perfectly well, no social difficulties, no communication problems with other autistic kids, non-autistic with non-autistic, and the trouble only occurs when the two cross. I've got a book here on just to my right, and
but so basically you're saying the symptoms can be eliminated, but that goes completely against what the neurodiversity movement stands for.
No, it doesn't stand for that, going against symptoms. It doesn't say we should not treat things like sickle cell disease.
Well, I know, but they claim that these mental conditions are not diseases.
And I would agree most of the time. On most of them, I would say disease is the wrong term, because disease, disorder, disability, etc., all have different distinct meanings. So when you say,
all right, so what would you say is the proper term for this?
I would say the proper term for autism is disability.
Okay, and so disabilities are generally bad things to have. So I would assume that you would not want me to blind you or paralyze you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so also related to the disability movement, there is the belief that disability is not a bad thing. Yet no one wants to pretty much no one wants someone else to blind them or paralyze them. And if they were consistent, they wouldn't object to that, because after all, those are disabilities, and disabilities are not bad. So actually, this movement has reached startling heights. So there was recently a super successful YouTube star who calls himself Mr. Beast, who paid for 1,000 people to get cataract surgery to restore their eyesight. And you would think that is a good thing, but he was attacked by sources as prominent as the Washington Post for promoting the ableist idea that disability is a bad thing that needs to be cured. Now, pretty much everyone, if gone blind, and by the way, my grandfather was blind for the last several years of his life, if they went blind, they would want surgery to correct it. Certainly, if it can be corrected by minor surgery, they would want to do it.
I could safely say that not everyone who's blind would want to do it. We've even got
well, perhaps not people born blind, but people who go blind definitely want to be cured.
Yeah, because there's been studies about quality of life done on disabled people, on people in general, and you find that there's no relationship between disability and quality of life. There's no relationship between
So you mean happiness?
Yeah, happiness, joy. There's no relationship between the two.
So let me ask you, if you went blind and it could be fixed by simple surgery, would you take it?
I would say that would depend on things like side effects.
Oh, okay. So let's just assume the surgery is
such as our offer to
really very basic, like cataract surgery. So after a couple hours, you'll be able to go home with no symptoms at all. I assume you'd take it.
As in for autism or blindness?
This is for blindness.
For blindness, I'd probably take it if there were no side effects.
Yes, that's assumed.
Yeah, then I would take it.
Okay, so why, given the problems for this mental condition, won't say the name of it, if there were such an easy treatment for it, then why shouldn't people take it?
And this is the part where I'm saying about when people talk about eugenics and so on, that's not...
Yeah, how is attempting to cure disabilities eugenics? Because eugenics attempts to stop the less desirable people from reproducing.
Yeah,
So
and
how is curing mental disorders in any way eugenics?
autism is primarily genetic, so the only route to curing it is by gene selection or gene editing, which means
But that's not necessarily true.
selecting.
Certainly, so as I said, it has been primarily done in children. I'm one of the first adults on Earth that it was done for, but magnetic resonance therapy greatly improves symptoms. And also what's being studied are bacterial transplants now. So bacterial transplants show great hope in reducing the symptoms.
Yeah, and that supports my theory about autism, about these things not being part of autism.
Well, okay, so you use that trick, not being part of. So if it's not part of it, then what is it? So of course it's defined by humans, but yeah, the neurodiversity movement says that things like anxiety and digestive disorders are not part of it, but comorbid with it. And that's something they do just so they can say it's not a bad thing. And given many of these children have never developed anxiety, have never had serious anxiety at all or digestive problems, and then they develop this condition, and then they have anxiety and digestive problems, why wouldn't they be part of it? It's just a trick you're using so you can avoid saying that there are any bad things about it. Now,
not
the
a trick
fact
for
that,
if
what's
we
that?
want, it's not a trick for if we want to do legitimate science, in order for something to be considered a disorder, there's got to be a common denominator altogether. But not every
What has to be a common denominator?
In order for something to be a disorder, there must be something everyone with the diagnosis has in common. But
not necessarily. So, for COVID, which stands for coronavirus disease, to be a disease, does everyone with it have to have a common symptom?
They've got the COVID, but haven't they?
What's that?
Ever been identified with the COVID, but haven't they all diagnosed with it? And they all do have those things in common. And that's how we got identified, as it's so limited how many symptoms we've identified on it. But if you allow me to finish first of all, the things that we're seeing
sensory overload.
The things which are seen in common among autistic people is something Lorna Wynne called the triad of impairments: difficulty in social communication, social interaction, and social.
Yeah, those are bad things.
Actually, no, they're not bad things. What's bad here is the ignorance of non-autistic people. This is
so yes, the core belief.
Empathy. Have you read about double empathy?
Yes, I know what empathy is.
No, double empathy.
Yeah, yes, I think I've read that article. Yes, the core the core belief of the neurodiversity movement is that this condition would be completely harmless if people stopped discriminating against them and made accommodations. There's absolutely no evidence that these accommodations will work, and they give absolutely none.
That's not the core belief. The core belief isn't discrimination will stop if the right accommodations are provided. That's not
the core. What is it?
Neurodiversity is simply natural variation in neurological development. But
yes, as I said, obviously neurodiversity exists in any organisms with neurological systems.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying to yourself, natural means good, but natural does not.
I never said natural means good.
You applied that when you said that, oh, if it was natural, it would be good, and so on. So
I don't think I said that, but anyway, yes. The belief that with proper accommodation, this condition would be harmless is something that is given with absolutely no evidence. So as you said, This is defined by lack of social skills. There will never be a time where lack of social skills is not a problem in a society. Society and social literally go together.
Yeah, but what's social about? When we look back at our ancestors, it was social to think the women are witches and burn them at the stakes. It was social
Well,
to go
actually, more
slavery.
witches were hanged,
It
and
was
also
social
many
to be a
men were
racist.
hanged. But yes, obviously,
It was
and
social
there
to
are
be
things.
sexist. It was
Yes,
social to be
there are things
discriminatory.
that are considered normal now, which I believe will be regarded as atrocities in the future, like how we treat animals and how we forcibly send men to war. But that's not related to the fact that lack of social skills will never fail to be problematic.
Socializing a two-way street. It goes in both directions.
Obviously.
Yeah, so you can't go place all the blame on an autistic person. It goes both ways.
Yeah, again, it comes down to the fact that the problem is discrimination by neurotypical people. But there are also ways to objectively measure social skills. So, such as animals that live in large groups are more social and know more what to do than animals that live solitary lives.
Yeah, there's the sociability continuum, which goes on, and the autistic people tend to be on the lower side of it. But just
yeah, which is bad.
Sociability, what about the inabilities of the majority? Because the abilities that people with autism, schizophrenia, Down syndrome all have that non-disabled people don't. So
yes.
why
So
is seen as inferior?
So let me ask you, do you think schizophrenia is not problematic? So do you believe it's not bad to be schizophrenic?
I actually would say, yes, it's not bad to be schizophrenic. I would say when you actually come down to the truth and acknowledge the whole earth is one organism, and such as ask yourself, why are the rates of things like schizophrenia, Down syndrome, ADHD on a constant rise if the normal way is the healthy way, such as
well, there are many possible ways, but that doesn't mean normal is
business.
healthy. So let me ask you, you say schizophrenia is not bad, but could a society function where everyone was schizophrenic?
Yes, I would say we actually would be able to.
Oh, well, that would be remarkable given schizophrenia is characterized by many things like paranoid delusions.
Do you know where
And
those paranoid
they
delusions
often
come
have,
from?
What's that?
Do you know where the paranoid delusions come from and what causes them? Because there's no schizophrenic gene, there's no autism gene, there's no ADHD gene.
I don't think that has been shown. But generally, things like this are too complex to be determined by just one gene. There are many genes in tandem because humans have 20,000 genes. There's not just one gene that's turned on or off to determine this. But all right, so you talk about paranoid delusions. So what causes them?
When it comes to someone's inability to enjoy reality as what it is, but mental illness and the addiction, they're the representatives that the world has become too overwhelming for someone. When you go claim these are the autism
Yes,
thing,
and if the person didn't have characteristics such as schizophrenia, that wouldn't be a problem. Now, I'm really amazed that you say that sensory overload is not a core symptom of this condition because I've seen it on pretty much every list.
Yeah, I've seen it in the diagnostic criteria. Diagnosing someone is one thing, the condition is something else altogether.
Well, I would say that it is the case that this condition doesn't really exist. It's a human term put for certain symptoms. Just
Yeah.
like anemia doesn't really exist. Humans just define a certain blood cell count, red blood cell count, to be anemic.
Yeah.
But you just choose to define it so the bad things are not symptoms of it.
Yeah.
Now, certainly, I will say this condition has caused a myriad of problems for me. I'm one of the few who has actually managed to live independently and do skilled work, but actually teach college math and statistics, but it has still caused a myriad of problems. My life would have been infinitely better without it. And there are many who will never learn to speak, and they won't be able to dress themselves or wash themselves. How is that not a bad thing? And you are trying to stop treatments for these people that would allow them to have a life that they would want.
No, we are not trying to stop treatment.
I know definitely from my friend I told you about that they are, and he is not an extremist. I've seen all the articles. Yeah, they have.
I
Yeah,
don't
so I
think
think
the
there
difference
was some
between
study
intervention.
somewhere that attempt to identify the genes for this condition, and the neurodiversity movement stepped in and stopped it because they were afraid that those genes
Yeah.
would be turned off to
Yeah, if you just allow me
cure
to
the
read
condition.
something, if you just allow me to
What's
read,
that?
you just allow me to read something by PhD Thomas Armstrong from a book he wrote. Right, I quote: "We already discussed in chapter 1 that there is no example of a normal brain sitting in a vat somewhere at the Smithsonian Museum, the NIM,
Yes, obviously no human is
other
normal.
institution. The same thing can be said of the human genome. As science writer Matt Ridley points out, the Human Genome Project is founded upon a fallacy. There is no such thing as the human genome. Neither in space nor in time can such a definite object be defined. At hundreds of different loci scattered throughout the 23 chromosomes, there are genes that differ from person to person. Nobody can say that blood group A is normal and OB and AB are abnormal. So when the Human Genome Project publishes the sequence of the typical human being, what will it publish for the ABO gene on chromosome 9? The project's declared aim is to publish the average or consensus sequence of 200 different people, but this would miss the point in the case of the ABO gene, because it is a crucial part of its function that it should not be the same in everybody. Variation is an inherent and integral part of the human, or indeed any human. The genes that have been examined in the course of this book have been associated with specific disabilities. Yet, this is just to say that they have been found on average more often in those with a particular diagnosis. The fallacy here is to identify the ADHD gene or schizophrenic genes, when we really don't even know what the mechanisms of these genes are in creating proteins that relate to specific psychiatric conditions. And the fact that so-called normal people have these genes too makes the task of identifying abnormal genes that much more difficult. End of quote. So if these
All right,
genes,
very good. Yes. So there is no normal or typical person because you could take the average of certain number of characteristics across humans. There is no human who would be average in every characteristic. Yeah, and there are an infinite number of characteristics that you can measure on humans. Yeah, there's no normal human being, but I don't see what the point of that is.
well, if you're going to do the screening to cure it, are you going to try curing people who don't even have it?
What am I going to do?
It was quite a big deal that you're going to do if you want to go curing it through genetics. Is you could cause devolution,
Yes,
ecological
gene
disasters.
therapy.
Yeah, ecological disasters, especially if you touch the human germline. If these genes are in both so-called normal and abnormal people, when you screen for them, you'll find a baby that tests positive for it, then you'll abort that one, abortion through that, and that's what we're talking about when we say genocide. Is if you're going to
by genocide you mean you mean abortion of those fetuses that are considered likely to have it.
Yeah, if we're going to abort every single one with a specific, that may be born with a specific diagnosis, that increases public prejudice, and that actually is performing genocide, doing exactly what they were doing in the eugenics movement, trying to prevent the next generation having any of these conditions at the cost of not letting them be born.
Okay, yeah. All right. But how would treatment for this condition be eugenicist?
It would only be a eugenicist if you're actually going for the term of curing it rather than actually intervening and helping, such as someone who supports neurodiversity wouldn't say that ABA is treatment. They wouldn't say that ABA is a cure to autism. But
it's not a cure. Yes. So basically, I do
help them learn to speak. It helps them learn to get dressed. It helps them learn to do so much, and that's why they approve of things like DIR floor time, the SCARES model, music therapy. Because all of this, it's not trying to eradicate the autism, but it's trying to alleviate the symptoms, alleviate their difficulties, and such as my overall argument comes down to, as I pointed out on my other video, it should all be done with informed consent.
But what about individuals who are not able to give informed consent?
Individuals, it should still be their choice. You shouldn't terminate them while they're in the womb just because they're going to have a disability.
So even if you know that an embryo is developing into a child that would have a horrible disability, you wouldn't suggest abortion?
I wouldn't suggest it for that reason. If they're doing it in the name of disability discrimination, because where you're going and claiming, oh, they're going to have a horrible life, that's an assumption, and quality of life is a subjective viewpoint that depends on your point of view, such as
yes,
people around me who are not disabled.
Yeah, certainly this is not the main thing I want to talk about, but there is the position of antinatalism that conscious beings are harmed by coming into existence due to the suffering that they will experience in the best of circumstances. But certainly, with some deformities or birth defects, the life is so miserable that you can hardly claim that the individual was benefited by being brought into existence. Wouldn't you agree with that?
When you talk about deformities are not part of neurodiversity.
Well, wouldn't neurodiversity have to include deformities of the neurological systems? So one thing the neurodiversity advocates claim is that that no neurological variations cause harm, and it would be hard to see how that would work by the laws of genetics, since certainly they will admit that, say, heart variations can cause harm, or liver variations can cause harm. Why would it be that there were no variations in the neurological system that could cause harm?
The neurodiversity movement doesn't claim that. It doesn't claim.
Well, I've read many articles that says it does, and also
again, by the sound of it here, it sounds like you're misunderstanding the term natural, what natural means.
Well, technically, natural includes everything, since nature includes everything that exists. So it's really a meaningless term. But anyway,
no, it doesn't actually. Natural means anything derived from nature. Anything man-made, such as medicine, that's artificial.
Well, yeah, it's often include that, but technically humans are part of nature. So Anything
And
made
so
by
we're
humans, it's
natural.
natural.
So we're
Yes.
natural. And such as say, what the reason I've got epilepsy, that wasn't part of my natural development. That was a reaction to me banging my head during an accident, and that resulted in epilepsy. So that wasn't my
Yeah. So this
something
condition.
interfered. Something
Yeah.
interfered with our development, and that caused it. So we actually
Yeah.
never
So this condition causes people to bang their head against walls, sometimes to bang their heads through walls. So how is that not bad?
that is something which we see as bad, and that's why we support intervention for it.
Intervention, but wouldn't it be better if it just didn't exist in the first place?
Actually, no, that would not be better, because that will come at the cost. You send the good and the bad away together. So
What good comes from this?
You're being very narrow, sticking by one characteristic at a time, because basically it takes multiple genes that produce that to bang their head on the wall. That takes multiple genes,
Yes,
right?
but the genetic
genes,
cause is irrelevant to the effect.
but those multiple genes contribute towards multiple phenotypes. So eliminate one, you're not just going to eliminate them banging their head. You're going to eliminate numerous phenotypes. Like you could eliminate their ability to read. You could eliminate their ability to walk.
Most of them aren't able to learn to read anyway.
Actually, they can if you do it through their natural way of learning.
Well, what is their natural way?
Studies are showing it's more to do with what they're particularly interested in by exercising the posterior regions of the brain more.
Okay, but yeah, so those symptoms can be removed by exercising the posterior region of the brain. First of all, it hasn't been shown that it's effective in all of them, or even most of them. And second of all, wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to use it? So the whole point of the neurodiversity movement is that it can be treated with accommodation, but wouldn't it be better if the accommodations weren't needed? So as an analogy, there is a condition called aquatica urtica, I believe, which occurs mainly in women and essentially is an allergy to water. So it's very difficult to live with. Those people can only bathe briefly. They must be careful not to sweat or not to be caught in the rain. So of course, it won't be problematic if you never come into contact with water, but wouldn't it be better if you just didn't have it? So that's the same thing with this. And so, as you said, so Jonathan Mitchell in the video, which he made a video about, said that he has been fired from over 20 jobs and he has never had a full-fledged girlfriend and very few friends. And you said that is entirely based on discrimination, but how are you going to change that? How are you going to get these people employed when they cannot be sufficiently productive? How are you going to get women to want to be with them romantically? It is known that the proportion of men who have this condition, who manage to marry or have equivalent long-term relationships, is fairly low.
And once again, a relationship's a two-directional street. So how can
Yeah,
all
obviously, but one has to come from the other. And you're never going to get
that. They've both got to come from each other. You can't place all the responsibility on just one in a relationship.
Okay, yeah, but you're never going to get most people to want to be in a romantic relationship with one of these people. And how are you going to handle when they have extreme rages? Yeah, so the accommodations that the neurodiversity people suggest is incredibly vague. But I do want to ask you,
Okay.
have you had any treatment yourself?
Yes.
What was it?
They have I've had a VNS therapy. That's a form of surgery where someone's been implanted by my heart that goes to my brain.
That's for epilepsy, correct?
Yeah, that's for the epilepsy.
I meant for this other condition.
Concerning my autism, nah, my dad pulled me out of it because he could see how abusive it was. That the treatment.
So what, you were having the applied behavioral analysis?
Yeah, so my dad pulled me out of it.
Yeah, I do agree that is also harmful, but it's really a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if you don't, then you're going to have all kinds of problems. So having a lack of social skills and not knowing how to interact with people is going to cause a huge amount of problems. Now, ABA, applied behavioral analysis, does forcibly suppress that, and there is a lot of trauma associated with it. But it also has enabled some people to live fairly normal lives, normal as what most would consider good, being able to live independently. Some even able to have romantic relationships, able to hold jobs, and so on. So it's really a case of either way it's bad. I agree there is a lot of trauma. It is to a large extent like I'm left-handed, like being forced to write with your right hand instead of your left.
Yeah.
But yeah, it also, I
from
think,
that point, I didn't have any treatment from that point concerning my autism, but I've turned out just fine. And I didn't go any treatment.
You say you're just fine, but you can't live independently.
Well, no one can live independently, really, when you look at what independent means.
Okay, that's just a matter of pedantic. So I live without having family members or anyone else to support me.
I'm living here with there's no family members here supporting me. Only I live here.
So is
my
this
family.
your home? Is this your house or apartment?
Yeah, this is my bungalow.
May I ask how you afford it if you don't work?
For what we call the Department of Work and Pensions in my country in the UK. For something called personal independence payment. It's not.
We also have disability insurance here. But yeah, so the basic premise is that this condition is not going to be problematic with proper accommodation is complete nonsense. And so you're all right with magnetic resonance therapy to treat it. You don't think that that should be banned?
I'm okay with treating it if the individual gives consent to it.
But generally, the effective treatments, there have been a few cases where it was arguably cured, were done with the individuals were children, which is necessary before their brains fully develop and before they can learn social skill. Obviously, children can't really give informed consent.
And that's not a cure to autism, but what you've just suggested. That's not a cure.
What have I just suggested?
You suggested more to do with treating it, not curing it.
Magnetic resonance therapy, which uses magnetic signals, electrical signals to synchronize parts of the brain. I had it about a year ago. I'm one of the first adults on Earth to be treated for this condition that way.
So you're telling me about you've just gone and changed your genotype through magnetic resonance imaging?
Not changed my genotype.
Precisely, but you haven't cured it. You haven't cured autism.
I didn't say it was cured, but so what's also said with children is lost diagnosis. So they're no longer diagnosable with it. So their symptoms alleviate to such an extent that the tests no longer show they have it. And something that shows real promise is bacterial transplants. I myself take probiotics. So basically that changes the bacterial makeup in the
Yes.
intestines. Yes, so yeah, about 90% of human cells are bacteria cells. So it completely changes the bacteria in one's intestines, and that greatly alleviates symptoms, sometimes to the point of being cured. And so is that a bad thing?
No, and that's why we're not against it.
I definitely know a number are, and they've attempted to stop clinical trials to find treatments because they say it's like curing homosexuality.
No, the trials have stopped. Other eugenic trials, the trials on genetic editing and so on. They're the trials that keep.
So wait, so say would gene editing to prevent cancer be eugenics in your view?
No, because the cancer's not trying to prevent the next generation from being born.
Well, this
It,
would. If more people had this condition, there would be essentially no generations. So the number of them who manage to have children is very low.
yeah. So if they're not doing anything to the genes, they're not trying to cure the autism. Such as
Well, I mean, how would gene therapy to cure it, where you basically delete an individual's genes shortly after birth, be eugenics?
it would be eugenics because you're actually modifying it to make it what they think it should be. Yeah, what they define as the normal human. But as numerous scientists around me are pointing out, there's no such thing as the normal human.
Okay, yeah, there are no such thing as normal humans, but a lot of humans are more functional than others and certainly are happier than others. So most people without this condition are a lot happier than those who are banging their heads against walls having screaming fits.
Actually, no, that's not entirely true. As I mentioned, the quality of life has nothing to do with disability, such as
Well, certainly it does. So probably if you were blind, you would be you would be fairly miserable, at least for a while.
blind. A lot of blind people have said the exact opposite. A lot of deaf people have said.
Yeah. But you said you did say if you became blind and it could be cured or reversed, treated, you could regain your vision with minor surgery, where you could just wake up and go home a few hours later with no ill effects. You would do it.
And doesn't that show it's a subjective viewpoint? That's from how I'm looking at life, from what I'm imagining life to be
It
like.
is subjective, yes. So, by the way, there was a girl, Carly Fleischman, who had this condition and was unable to talk. She had constant screaming fits, but when she was, I think, 13, she actually started to type, and her first word was help. And then she began making more complex sentences. And she said, when I scream, it's because I feel my legs are on fire and there are 1,000 ants on my arms. So if, say, when such child was, say, 3 years old, you could just delete a few genes so that that wouldn't happen, then wouldn't that be a good thing? Or you could just give her some probiotics so that she wouldn't have those symptoms. Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, we would approve of medication, the neurodiversity movement.
Well, I think you should read some of their articles because they definitely don't. And as I said, this friend I had has a Twitter page, mainly devoted to the neurodiversity movement, says that wanting to cure them is as bad as wanting to cure gays. And by the way, he himself was thrown out of his parents' home. They were actually his aunt and uncle, but essentially his parents' home for homosexuality when he was 15. But yes, he said that wanting to cure it is as bad as wanting to cure homosexuality. And also anyone who says that it is problematic should be tackled by government officials and put in prison, and a whole number of things. And I thought he was just a wingnut, but I read other neurodiversity articles and they said essentially the same thing. And the real criticism I have with neurodiversity, all these neurodiversity advocates, is that they all are very high functioning. They all have, they are all skilled professionals who manage to live independently and have pretty much no disability. And many of them have even managed to have children. It's easy for them to say there's no need for treatment. Certainly, I don't think if they had a choice, they would have a more severe form.
Actually, that criticism is very, very easy to overcome, but I don't know why people like yourself have this one. So many of the people you've described, you actually described me.
Okay, are you a skilled professional?
I would say not professional. Where you go saying, I assume you know autism's a neurodevelopmental disability.
That's what it's called, but it doesn't matter what any human calls it. That doesn't change what it is.
When I were a child, I'm exactly what you've been describing.
Yeah, so that's why I'm so critical of neurodiversity advocates.
But look who I've turned out to be. Yeah, I've turned out, I've been a martial arts and self-defense teacher. I'm a fine artist, a musician.
Yeah, you're very high functioning, but the people who are not have nothing like your quality of life.
But I wear always that way. Our precisely just the way you've been describing people.
Yeah, that's why there's a need for treatment.
I didn't have any treatment.
Okay, yeah, sometimes it does get a lot better as one ages, but I don't see what that proves.
This is what I call self-prophecy, where you've gone and made a prophecy, and this is what those who made statistics, things like the normal distribution curve, the 5% rule, and so on. But
you mean the empirical rule?
Yeah, they were all eugenicists: Francis Galton, Carl Pearson, and Ronald Fisher. They're like
yes, Francis Galton coined the word eugenics. Yes, he also had the idea of fingerprint identification for crime.
Yeah, for confirmation bias, and you've like got a confirmation bias here, thinking about those ASD.
Yeah, you've made
they're never
pretty
going
much.
To so
well, you've made pretty much no points except that there is that what we call normal as opposed deviant is arbitrary, and there's no such thing as a normal person. I never denied that. But since this condition causes extreme harm, then why would you be opposed to treatment? And you say you're not opposed to treatment. So let me ask you this. So let's say if bacterial transplants become available and they allow many people to be cured, put cured in quotation marks, would you consider that to be a bad thing?
No.
Well, you're very different from many neurodiversity advocates I told you about, including my friend.
Extra fun, but those in the mainstream are not what all the ones on the internet are doing about.
Well, I wonder if you could show me some who are mainstream, and if we developed some probiotic that would relieve the symptoms of this condition, that would do these people 1,000,000 times more good than anything the neurodiversity movement has produced.
I assume you know the microbiome research, don't you?
Yes. Are you opposed to that? Because I know a whole lot of neurodiversity advocates are.
And that research has been done by neurodiversity advocates?
Not the ones I've read, including the ones who have written articles and including the ones at TED Talks. So actually on YouTube, I looked for TED Talks that had neurodiversity in neurodiversity. They contain the word neurodiversity. I found about 20.
Yeah.
So I will say that the premise of this neurodiversity movement, that this condition is completely harmless and just a normal variation, is such a crazy idea that a few decades ago, if you were to take a dangerous dose of crystal meth and speculate about wild ideas that will never possibly gain traction, this would be one. That this condition that causes so much misery and impairs people so much would just be considered a normal variation, and that if there were treatment for it developed, it would be decried as eugenics. And most of the population do not consider it harmless. To a large extent, the anti-vaccine movement, I assume you know about it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm half English, and I generally think most of the things happening in England and America are about the same. So, yeah, so the anti-vaccine movement is largely a result of the entirely discredited claim that vaccines cause this condition, which they don't. That has been debunked. But a lot of people don't vaccinate children because they're so worried about children developing this condition.
Yeah. That's something. If you actually want to see some of the mainstream ones, you're not going to find them on the internet. It's going to take.
Okay, where would you find them? Because pretty much anything that's published is now on the internet.
You find ones like in this book here, The Power of Neurodiversity by PhD Thomas Armstrong. There is one, A Neurodiversity Reader by Dr. Damian Milton. And this one's not necessarily about neurodiversity, but The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gerber Mayer. And then there's some by sociologist here, Neurodiversity Studies, The Autism Industrial Complex, CRISPR People, Mutation, Randomness, and Evolution, the Autistic Community and the Neurodiversity Movement, and some you've heard about Neurotribes by Steve Silverman.
Yes, Jonathan Mitchell wrote a scathing article about that.
Yeah. And just allow me to read you something out about someone with genes and so on, who wrote a book about things to do with eugenics. It says, I quote, even a person who has certain traits, such as below average intellect, may in some other way be genetically superior, a determination that we cannot make until all of the estimated 23,000 genes are mapped and compared to the entire population. And even then, comparative judgments cannot be made except on very simplistic grounds, such as counting the total number of genes judged inferior and superior. Even this approach falls short because certain single genes can cause far more problems than others, and conversely can confer on the person more advantages than most other genes, such as genes that result in the production of above average levels of glutathione. This trait would reduce the likelihood of disease from cancer to heart disease to strokes. It then would be necessary to rate each individual gene and gene interaction, something that so far has not been done. In addition, many so-called inferior genes are actually mutations that were caused somewhere in the human genetic past and were subsequently passed on to the victim's offspring. Of the identified diseases, over 5,000 are a result of heritable mutations, and none of these 5,000 existed in our past before the mutation causing it was introduced into the human gene pool. As these mutations accumulate, a deterioration of the genome called devolution results, an event that is the opposite of the eugenics goal of trying to create the most flawless race and then limit reproduction to members of this race. This goal is flawed because the accumulation of mutations tends to result in all races becoming less perfect. End of quote. So the more we weaken the gene pool, like the more they do eugenics and so on, the less likely we are to survive. Like if we were all genetically identical.
Yes. Yeah, obviously you don't want a word with everyone is genetically identical. You do want some diversity. Now, at least in the US, I suspect in England too, diversity has just been a buzzword with no evidence for its being beneficial. But yes, so you don't want everyone the same, but how would treating this condition result in everyone being the same? You haven't explained that. And yes, so if someone afflicted with this condition, suffering horribly, could be treated by deleting some genes in their genome, then obviously you should do it. So basically the question I ask is, would I have had a better life with this condition or without it? And there's no question, without it, 1,000 times. If I had not,
a viewpoint.
Yeah, but no, it's not a viewpoint. Would I have felt better? That is subjective, but also, well, would I have been happier without it or with it? Obviously, without it. So Jonathan Mitchell managed to be a medical transcriptionist for a while, but if he hadn't had this condition, he might have been something a lot better. And I probably would have been something a lot better. And that is why I'm quite hostile to the diversity movement. And I think it is time to end it. We need serious opposition to it. And we certainly need them to prevent them from shutting down clinical trials to develop treatments as they are attempting to do.
In the science community, it's actually the scientists themselves closing the things like clinical things down. Like, do you know about the Chinese doctor who was sentenced for 3 years? He decided to touch the human germline to try and prevent someone from HIV. It was actually the entire science community that sentenced him for 3 years. And the Chinese.
Yeah, that's quite likely. China is known for sentencing people for doing anything that they don't want. It's still officially communist, but yeah, but HIV is an entirely different condition. But yeah, neurodiversity movements, many of them, you can say they're fringe, but I think this movement it's about. So basically, they say things like different doesn't mean broken, to mean this condition is harmless. And one of their favorite things is that this condition is not a bug, it's a different operating system. Yes, a different operating system, but basically, a better analogy would be an operating system that allows the computer to run most of the time versus an operating system that constantly causes the computer to overheat and catch on fire.
Yeah, that sensitivity, genetic sensitivity. We found again, if you choose to go deleting the genes and so on to deal with these things, affecting the sensitivity, that would mean that we would have had to kill people like Einstein, Charles
Darwin. All right.
Yeah.
Jonathan Mitchell wrote Undiagnosing Einstein, Jefferson, and Gates. And as far as I know, no one who claims that these individuals had the condition has responded to his arguments. I'm not saying that no response is possible, but no one has given a response. And again, if these individuals had it, they had it on an incredibly low level and were incredibly high functioning. That's leagues different from someone who will never learn to talk or never learn to wash themselves.
Einstein.
So basically, here's a question for you. So take most of the people with this condition. If you could press a magic button so that they didn't have this condition, then would most of them have better lives? And there's no question, yes.
Actually, no, that comes all the way down to themselves, to how they choose to view life.
How they choose to view life? Well, most of them are not functional enough to have any life views. Most of them, or at least a large proportion of them, will never learn to talk. They're certainly not able to have conversations at anything like the level we are.
You're talking about just about 35% of them.
Okay, 35%. But as I said, of a longitudinal study of 185 of them diagnosed as children, only 2 of them had managed to live independently in adulthood.
Yeah.
So those odds are not good. And generally,
what about how many today where we're hearing such? Have you ever read the Autism Industrial Complex?
no.
Well, you'll find that a lot of the diagnosing that goes on today, people who would not have been diagnosed anywhere before 1994.
Oh yeah, I know, because only those who were very severe were diagnosed.
Yeah, people with what they call Connor syndrome, and Professor Alicia Broderick goes and spells out of how it was all perfectly orchestrated to be a money scam altogether, but it was all about capitalism. But today, anyone can make money out of it.
Well, regarding capitalism, you would probably rather live in the United Kingdom, which is relatively capitalistic, than somewhere that's not, like China. But that's a different point.
Yeah, that's what Alicia Broderick pointed out. So they'll go diagnose people who are not even worthy of a diagnosis to make money out of it, and that's what she wants.
Yeah, but that's not relevant to my claim that this condition is a debilitating illness.
Whether it's debilitating or not depends on the environment, and it depends on social settings.
Yeah, but you're never going to create an environment and social settings so that it's not problematic. It's called wrong planet syndrome. Yes, people often feel like they're on the wrong planet. But what can you do? Can you create a different planet for them?
And now we can make changes to policies. And we can make
like I said, there's absolutely no evidence that that will work to become non-problematic. Like I said, if there could be a probiotic developed that would alleviate the symptoms even moderately, that would be that would do them a million times more good than any policy changes the neurodiversity movement will ever achieve.
All the things that you're suggesting are already in action.
Well, that's good that they're in action. Yeah. And I hope there's more success. Yes, there have been, but it's coming at great opposition from the neurodiversity movement.
Not the mainstream, just these people.
Well, all the entire movement that I've heard of, so I don't see how that's the mainstream. And now what's posted on the internet is the mainstream. The mainstream movements are based on the internet now.
Do you actually look up the authors of the articles that you read?
Yeah, and I know you mentioned Steve Silberman. He definitely is mainstream, and he also claims that this condition is harmless and treating it would be a horrible tragedy. And he also mentions some individuals who, if they had it at all, had it at a very high functioning level. Those success stories of what great things these people can achieve. Yeah, they all use very high functioning individuals. Yeah, by the way, I didn't think of this. I should have written down some tweets from this former friend's Twitter page to read them to you, to show that the neurodiversity advocates definitely are against any treatment for it. So what I will say regarding treatment is, yeah, the problem with applied behavioral analysis, ABA, is that attempts to treat the symptoms rather than the underlying condition. So it's like trying to make someone who's right hand or left-handed write with their right hand. That's that's going to cause problems. It will always feel unnatural. But what real treatments would do, like magnetic resonance therapy, bacterial transplants, is to actually change the underlying physiology. So those symptoms disappear, not to attempt to control those symptoms. It's like, like trying to cure that's like trying to cure cough, like by simply not coughing when you feel the urge.
And this is what the neurodiversity movement agrees with. It's not against medication.
Well, like I said, a whole number of them are very much against it because they say it would be like medicine for homosexuality.
Such as not one other person who agrees with neurodiversity has actually ever said to me I should stop consuming medication for my epilepsy. None of them have said
no,
that.
what they say is that epilepsy is simply comorbid with it, not part of it. Which is arbitrary. And by the way, comorbid conditions
are
conditions that occur together. It doesn't mean are not causally related. A lot of children develop this condition and develop gastrointestinal problems, epilepsy, and a whole lot of other things, which they didn't have before. So it seems very much the case that they are linked.
It increases the likelihood depending on what genes you've got. Such our genes.
Yeah, there's a genetic component. No one denies it. So there is a video I've seen. By the way, I sent this video to my pro neurodiversity friend, which is what caused him to finally cut me off. It shows a boy who got bacterial transplants. Sadly, they are currently banned in the US. Hopefully they'll be made legal after clinical trials. So he got bacterial transplants and he actually was cured, or at least lost diagnosis, and is very happy about it. And he now has a full life. And he actually said, I want to be a doctor. Would you say that's a bad thing?
No.
Then what kind of neurodiversity advocate are you? This is what caused my neurodiversity advocate friend to cut me off. And yeah, I think it's also very harmful to cherry pick the data to make it seem like these historical figures like Jefferson and Einstein had this condition when there's no evidence for it. So it doesn't really help the people who are not able to live independently, that supposedly someone who wrote the Declaration of Independence had this condition.
There actually is evidence for it.
Okay, yeah, I know the evidence with Jefferson, things, so data is usually cherry-picked and stretched. So for instance, Hamilton, who was his enemy, who hated him, wrote that he had a shifty glance, and from that you infer that he didn't make eye contact, and so he had it. And he was shy, so therefore everyone who's shy is a candidate for having this. Okay, so for Jefferson, what evidence is there?
Yeah. I'll read it out to you now. I've just opened that.
Is this a Norm Legend article or book?
It's from a book, it's not from any article.
Is it by Norm Legend?
Nah.
Who's the author?
The author is Dr. Gerber.
Okay, all right.
He says, I quote, "Don't be so sensitive, people are often told. In other words, don't be so yourself. Genetic vulnerabilities do not code for illness, but they may confer sensitivity for a person being more impacted by life's vicissitudes and someone else with a hardier predisposition. A far more trivial effect. Sensitive people feel deeply, and are more easily overwhelmed by stress, not just subjectively, but physiologically. Both monkeys and humans, for example, can inherit genes involved in the production of certain brain chemicals such as serotonin, that can make them more susceptible to negative experiences, or, on the other hand, more amenable to the effects of positive ones. And of course, sensitivity too is a continuum. Genes affect how sensitive one is to environment, and the environment affects how relevant one's genetic differences may be, the leading geneticist R.C. Lewontin has said. When an environment changes, all bets are off. Some people will feel more pain and will therefore have greater need to escape into the adaptations that mental illness or addiction represent. They'll have more need to tune out, to dissociate, to split into parts, to develop fantasies to account for realities they are unable to endure. But that's a far cry from saying that they have a heritable neurobiological disease. These are the children that Tom Boyce, a professor of pediatrics and psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, described as orchids, exquisitely sensitive to their environment, making them especially vulnerable under conditions of adversity, but unusually vital, creative, and successful within supportive, nurturing environments. The same
Sorry, does this concern Jefferson at all? You said it does.
No, not Jefferson. I said Dr. Gerber May. Genes that in a stressed environment can help potentiate mental suffering may, under positive circumstances, help promote stronger mental resilience and therefore happiness. Sensitive people have the potential to be more aware, insightful, inventive, artistic, and empathic if their sensitivity is not crushed by maltreatment or disdain. The most sensitive of our kind have made some of the most lasting cultural contributions. Many of these have also suffered the most intense pains during their lives. Sensitivity can be quintessential combo package, gift and curse all in one. End of quote.
Yes, sorry, but I said Jefferson. I said that there is absolutely no evidence that he had this condition. And you said this book showed.
No, it's that I will talk about
Yes.
humans in general there.
Yes, but I said specifically Jefferson, and I said there's no point in pretending with extremely vague and cherry-picked evidence that historical figures like Jefferson and Einstein had this condition.
Yeah, and I'm not cherry picking. I'm looking at the actual genetic research that.
Well, I spoke specifically about Jefferson, but yeah. Again, what you said, that only describes the very high functioning.
Actually, no, it doesn't. It actually describes humans in general, but the ones who are more sensitive, like where I mentioned there's no schizophrenic genes, for example. Earlier on inside Dr. Gerber May's book.
Yes, there are no schizophrenic genes because
schizophrenia means split mind. And he asks, why would someone's mind feel the need to split itself? And he points out it's because they can't cope with what the world's become.
Yeah, so how is that saying that schizophrenia is not harmful?
And how is that not saying that so it's what people are doing to the environment that's causing them the problem? So should
well, yes, but
because humans are interconnected to everything around us. So when you affect someone around us, you affect us. You know, we're affected. We are not separate.
Yes, but 99% of humans manage to live in this environment without living in this condition. Yeah, so most schizophrenics, are very dysfunctional, and they're often not able to live on their own. And in mental hospitals, they often have screaming fits. So I don't see how it's not a bad thing. Certainly, it would be preferential not to have it. It would also be greatly preferential not to have this other condition, which we spoke about. In fact, this condition and schizophrenia share many things in common.
Yeah, and they've got some things in common.
Yeah, so basically this condition is characterized by lack of social skills, lack of functionality, sensory overload, and restricted and repetitive behavior. How is that not bad?
Well, how is it bad? This.
Well,
What?
I'd say it's bad because it causes harm to themselves and others. I mean, so obviously you have to have a standard to call something bad, just like morality. Morality is, I believe, is subjective. You
Yes.
have to have some standard, some premises to say something is moral or immoral. However, I do have multiple jobs, and I have actually been here about an hour and a half, so I am going to have to go. I will say I do still believe this condition is really harmful. It has caused a myriad of problems in me. And as I said, I have had treatments like magnetic resonance therapy, and I'm looking forward to more being developed, and that will greatly improve the lives of these people.
Okay. Thank you
And
for
you
coming on.
are not against treatments like magnetic resonance therapy.
No, because that's just to help the individuals. That's not to cure them of that.
Well, if they lose diagnosis, so the tests no longer show that they have it.
The NIMH, but they don't support the DSM. They don't agree with it, and even in the book I just quoted from.
So DSM, Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, correct?
Yeah, and the psychiatrists who absolutely disagree with that, and so on. And
Disagree with what?
All the diagnosing the DSM in general, because they point out where's the connection to the physiology. They point out that
well, yeah. So generally, mental disorders are not measured physiologically because they can't be, and that gives some problem of subjectivity. So for instance, with schizophrenia, so say there are 10 of the most common symptoms. How many does someone have to be schizophrenic?
Yeah, and that continually changes, such that they've even found out that those born in December 39% like to receive a diagnosis of ADHD because of the DSM.
Well, you don't know it's because of the DSM. It could be for whatever reason that those born in December, for whatever reason, are more likely to develop ADHD.
If you just allow me to share the project that they did, they investigate the prescription records of ADHD of nearly a million school children. And
yes.
what we came to find was that those who were diagnosed in December were misdiagnosed, but they did not actually have ADHD. It's simply just 3 years, being 3 years old, 11 months younger than their January counterparts in school, who were judged to be the same standard of someone 4 years old. And because they didn't have the self-regulation circuits or
yes, so typically in a school grade, the people are not, the children are not really the same age. They're within a year of each other. So yeah, they could be 11 months apart. So and when you're young, 11 months can make a huge difference. But yes, thank you. And at least compared to most neurodiversity advocates, you don't just attack your opposition as being Nazis, eugenicists, genocidal, etc. And yes, I hope for better treatments to be developed so that people can have a better quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you through all the books and so on I've read through by those who actually are scientists, not just people with YouTube channels, TikToks, using it as a social trend, but those who are actually involved in the science. But they're not against medication. They don't see it as wrong.
So you're not, for instance, against probiotics to alleviate symptoms. I've just started taking them. As I said, I've already had magnetic resonance therapy, and it's much better than ABA because it really changes the physiology. So for instance, changes the microbiome that you mentioned rather than just
Yeah.
attempting to suppress the symptoms.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like to ask, what is your full name?
Daniel Ma.
Daniel Marr?
Yeah. MRRA.
Oh, Daniel Moore. Ah, I actually see your name right there. Yes, I'm Keith Rodgers, mathematics and statistical instructor. One of, yeah, minority among these people in actually having managed to perform skilled work. But I certainly feel if I had developed neurotypically, I could have done a lot more. All right, but thank you.
Okay, thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you. Have a good day.
You too.